Hi there, and welcome to Power Play. I'm Vashi Capellos in Ottawa on this Monday. Tonight, Nicolas Maduro in court as Trump says the U.S. will run Venezuela.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition.
U.S. President Donald Trump announcing American control of Venezuela after a significant military and intelligence operation over the weekend to capture the country's dictator, Nicolas Maduro, who has now pleaded not guilty alongside his wife to American criminal charges in a New York court. We're going to have full coverage for you tonight, starting in the U.S. with retired top American Army General and former CIA Director General David Petraeus. Then Trump's former National Security Advisor John Bolton will be here. Plus, we're going to dig into the potential Canadian implications with, of course, our front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie, all our Monday regulars, will be here tonight. And Freeland is set to step down as a member of Parliament. The former Deputy Prime Minister announcing moments ago she'll resign her seat in Parliament in the, quote, coming weeks after becoming an economic advisor to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and facing backlash from the opposition about why she didn't announce she was stepping down soon. We do, of course, have a lot to get to with the situation in Venezuela, but I will start tonight with that breaking news on the home front this hour. Freeland has just announced she will resign her seat in the House of Commons in the, quote, coming weeks. She wrote in a social media post posted not long ago, Ukraine is at the forefront of today's global fight for democracy, and I welcome this chance to contribute on an unpaid basis as an economic advisor to President Zelensky. In accepting this voluntary position, I will be stepping aside from my role as the Prime Minister's special representative for the reconstruction of Ukraine. In the coming weeks, Freeland goes on to write, I will also leave my seat in Parliament. I want to thank my constituents for their years of confidence in me. I'm so grateful to have been your representative. Now, the statement comes after Volodymyr Zelensky announced the appointment, there it is, early today on social media. Not long after he made that announcement, the opposition Conservatives called out Freeland for remaining as an MP. A source close to the former minister said she accepted the, quote, unpaid and not full-time position with Ukraine on December 22nd, informed the prime minister on Christmas Eve. When I asked again, why not resign as an MP right now, since she's going to be advising a foreign government in an official capacity, might not be paid, might not be full-time, but it is an official capacity, I was told it would likely be before the end of January that Freeland does end up resigning her seat as an MP. And she has resigned as the special advisor to the prime minister, which you'll remember was a position she was appointed to all the way back in September when she resigned from cabinet. She said at that time she would resign her seat as an MP. This is the first anywhere near a specific sort of timeline that we're getting on that front. We're going to dig into the implications of this with our front bench just a little bit later on in the show. Right now, though, we've got to turn to Venezuela and the evolving situation there.
We're dealing with the people that just got sworn in. And don't ask me who's in charge, because I'll give you an answer and it'll be very controversial.
What does that mean?
It means we're in charge. We were prepared to do a second strike if we needed. We're totally prepared.
But that's off
We're
the table.
still prepared.
That's off the table now.
No, it's not. If they don't behave, we will do a second strike.
U.S. President Donald Trump on board Air Force One last night, explicitly telling reporters that America is in charge of Venezuela, and he's prepared to launch further military action to reinforce that. Those comments come after the capture of Nicolas Maduro and his wife, Celia Flores, transporting both to U.S. custody in New York. Video here of American authorities, for example, bringing Maduro and Flores to a New York City court today, where both pleaded not guilty to criminal charges, including narco-terrorism conspiracy, cocaine importation conspiracy, and the possession of machine guns and destructive devices against the United States. Maduro telling the judge he is a, quote, decent man and still insists he is the president of Venezuela. However, he's been ruling Venezuela as a dictator since losing the country's 2018 elections. Millions have fled that country during his reign, and much of the oil-rich nation now lives in poverty. Meantime, in Venezuela, Maduro's second-in-command, Delcy Rodriguez, has been sworn in as acting president, backed by the U.S., at least for now. Trump is celebrating the capture of Maduro as a military success, and last night suggested further U.S. action could come with other countries.
Colombia is very sick, too, run by a sick man who likes making cocaine and selling it to the United States. And he's not going to be doing it very long, let me tell you.
What does that mean? He's not going to be doing it very long.
He's not doing it very long. He has cocaine mills and cocaine factories. He's not going to be doing it very long.
So there will be an operation by the U.S.
It sounds good to me.
Are you considering U.S. action in Cuba?
We're not. I think it's just going to fall. I don't think we need any action. It looks like it's going down. Right now, Greenland is covered with Russian and Chinese ships all over the place. We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security. And Denmark is not going to be able to do it, I can tell you.
With us to dissect the U.S. operation and what could come next is former CIA Director General David Petraeus. The general also led the U.S. military operations in both Iraq and Afghanistan. Hi, General Petraeus. Pleasure to welcome you back to our program. Thank you very much for making the time.
Good to be with you again, Vashi. Thanks.
I wanted to start off, sir, given your extensive experience in both the military and the CIA, by asking about the operation itself. What stands out to you about what unfolded in Venezuela?
Well, how masterful it was, frankly. This is an enormous operation, over 150 aircraft of all different types, launched from 20 different locations, all brought together, having, of course, been exhaustively rehearsed prior to this, but all the actions synchronized. The supposedly sophisticated Chinese and Russian air and ballistic missile defense systems rendered incapable, destroyed, and no loss of life on the U.S. side, damage to an aircraft, a couple of soldiers wounded, but really an extraordinarily impressive display of American military power.
I had read on a number of occasions that there was a CIA team that was there since, it could have been since August, essentially tracking the Maduro's movements and accumulating all the intelligence. Can you reflect a little bit on what an operation like that would entail?
Well, let me just reflect on the fact that when you're doing this kind of operation, essentially a manhunt operation, and we've had many examples of this over the recent decades, the operation to bring Osama bin Laden to justice, the operations to take out the top leaders of Al-Qaeda in Yemen or Iraq or Islamic State leaders in Syria and so forth. So you establish pattern of life. You understand as much about the activities of the individual and those around him and so forth as you possibly can. And that involves more than just intelligence, human intelligence sources. It involves every technical capability that we can draw on as well, including open source intelligence. But all of this clearly was employed in this case. Reportedly, there was a mock used exactly a model of what it was that housed Maduro, and these forces had trained on this model, as they did, of course, prior to the operation to take down Osama bin Laden. This is all part of the normal approach to these operations. Indeed, they were ready to go earlier. They just needed the window of weather that finally materialized. But again, a very, very impressive, very complex operation, orchestrated magnificently.
When you look back, or when collectively we look back over the past few months, and the vessels, for example, all the incursions into the Caribbean, does it feel now like the intent was always to head in this direction, that was almost inevitable?
No, not at all. Keep in mind that Maduro was offered options. Yeah. He could have had exile in Turkey, I think Iran, other countries were held out to them. By the way, that's pretty instructive to the others now, as we begin to work with the acting president, who all of a sudden is, instead of striking a defiant tone, seems to be quite pliant and ready to carry out the directions of our Secretary of State and the others who will guide the actions of Venezuela, ultimately leading to what the president referred to, and now Secretary of State Marco Rubio has as well, which is a transition to presumably an elected government.
Do you think we can be sure that is presumably what will happen, and what sort of things
not at
will
all.
you?
No, many uncertainty.
Okay, so let me follow up and then ask sort of what you will be watching for in order to try and get some more certainty over the coming days and weeks.
Well, what I think the regime members, and of course, who've just basically taken out one, the very top, Maduro, and of course his wife, who is in league with him in many of these activities, and brought them to justice. And I'm pleased to see that take place, given his extraordinarily brutal track record over the years and the damage and destruction he's brought to the Venezuelan people and to their economy. But what we'll be watching for is, are these individuals responsive to directions from the United States? And how is it they're going to extricate themselves and avoid putting themselves on the X, as they say, becoming a target of this impressive U.S. military capability that we saw exercised in bringing Maduro to justice? I suspect they're going to try to cut deals over time. It's possible some elements within it could even come forward and say, we'll be the ones. But there's going to be an awful lot of that kind of activity ongoing in Venezuela. But keep in mind that this is a regime that was defeated overwhelmingly at the polls in 2024, and by nearly 2-to-1 margin. There's considerable evidence of this. This is not just speculation. They have the tabulations at the different polling sites. But Maduro refused to honor the outcome of that election, claimed that he had won by a narrow majority, and refused to leave office. So we'll have to see now. They're going to have to allow at some point in time either additional elections or a transition to the government that was elected in 2024.
It's interesting that you say that. So you think that will have to be the case. And I ask because it's interesting to watch the way in which the U.S. president is characterizing the motivation, right? So in the past, you might have heard there's some talk, obviously, about restoring true democracy, and in particular what happened in the last election, as you referenced. But there's a lot also about other motivations, including more U.S. access, to put it quite bluntly, to Venezuelan oil. So if the impetus is described, not solely about restoring democracy and not even close to solely, will that, do you think, have an impact on democracy actually taking hold?
I think that is actually the objective at this point. Again, there's just a transcript of a conversation between Secretary of State Rubio and his Dutch counterpart that implies a transition, again, to that kind of government. Look, there's a lot of motivations here. There's by no means all about the oil. It's about someone defying an American president, refusing options that could have kept him from this situation. Instead of spending exile comfortably in Turkey with his ill-gotten gains, he's likely going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary. That's a pretty powerful example for those who are left and those who now all of a sudden are striking a much more compliant tone. But there's a number of challenges here. They're just enormous. And we'll have to see, again, how each of these plays out over time. But I suspect that the acting president now realizes that if she does not comply with what the U.S. Directs her to do, that she could very well end up on the X herself.
The president has responded to a number of questions over the past 2 days from reporters or brought it up himself as to the idea of additional military action in other areas, other countries, I should be more specific: Cuba, Colombia, Denmark, Mexico even. And he hasn't ruled, it's different answers to be specific, but he hasn't ruled anything out. Does the military in the United States have the capacity to do all of that at once? Should that actually be the president's objective?
Well, it certainly doesn't have the capacity to do everything all at the same time, plus ensure deterrence in the Indo-Pacific and continue to support allies and friends in the Middle East, and ideally continue to support Ukraine as well. There's always risk involved with concentrating large numbers of assets in one theater versus what they could be doing in other theaters. That has always been the trade-off. I've been asked, for example, how long can the United States maintain the forces that it has in the Southern Command area of responsibility right now? The answer is as long as we want to, but recognizing that there would be risk taken in other theaters as a response, as a result of that. But look, I think a lot of these are for future leverage down the road. Colombia, look, they have elections coming up within a few months. I very seriously doubt that there would be any activity taken there, even though there are certain frustrations about what's going on. And let's recognize that the drugs that were coming out of Venezuela were actually cultivated and produced in Colombia. They have the largest amount of hectares under cultivation for coca that they have ever had, vastly greater by orders of magnitude than when I was, for example, the director of the CIA, and we worked with the Colombian government to drive cultivation down under 30,000 hectares. It's well over 200,000 now. There are other reasons for concern, and in a variety of other locations as well. But I think in the vast majority of cases, the military leverage is helpful, but you don't ever have to actually employ it.
Okay, I have to leave it on that note. General Petraeus, appreciate your analysis this evening very much. Thank you.
Always good to be with you, Vashi.
That's former CIA Director General David Petraeus. We're going to talk about the potential implications of all of this for Canada and the political reaction here in our country with our front bench a little bit later on in the show. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie will all be here. First, though, as the dust settles on this weekend's military operation, what is really motivating Donald Trump? His former national security advisor, John Bolton, is my next guest, and we'll talk about exactly that.
We're going to run the country until such time as we can do a safe, proper, and judicious transition. We're going to have our very large United States oil companies, the biggest anywhere in the world, go in, spend billions of dollars, fix the badly broken infrastructure, the oil infrastructure, and start making money for the country. It won't cost us anything because the money coming out of the ground is very substantial. We're going to be taking out a tremendous amount of wealth out of the ground.
U.S. President Donald Trump this weekend announcing he's prepared to run Venezuela for the long haul after capturing the country's dictator in a major military and intelligence operation Saturday. Now, despite arresting Nicolas Maduro, the U.S. Has backed the installment of his former second-in-command, Delcy Rodriguez, who has been now sworn in as the country's interim president, despite decrying the arrest of Maduro. So, what comes next? John Bolton was Donald Trump's national security advisor during his first administration. In the years since then, Bolton has become a harsh critic of the president and is currently facing criminal charges on the alleged mishandling of classified information. Hi, Ambassador Bolton. Good to see you again. Thank you very much for making the time.
Glad to be with you.
Maduro is gone, but I saw pictures today of his son sitting in the legislature. His vice president is obviously still there, and according to Donald Trump, at various points could end up running things on behalf of the United States or offering some sort of cooperation. I'm wondering what your assessment, Ambassador, is of the degree to which things could actually change for Venezuela, given that.
Well, I don't think things are going to change very much as long as the rest of the regime, missing Maduro to be sure, but as long as the rest of the regime is in place, it's filled with people who think the same way that he does at the top. And, they are not really making loud noises about the United States right now. I think they're playing for time. I think they want to check to make sure the military is still loyal. They want to see what their friends in Russia and Cuba, China, and Iran will do to help them. So they need some time to get things sorted out. But the idea that the U.S. is running Venezuela now and that the regime itself will simply do what we ask them to do, I think is fantasy.
Is there anything that could circumvent that? And by that, I mean a new election or, a leader who has won a previous election, something to that effect. I know Trump has been dismissive of that. What is your view?
Well, the way this should have worked out was what we tried to do back in Trump's first term in 2018 and 2019, when the opposition, led by interim President Juan Guaido, whom we recognized as the legitimate president, tried to get individuals in the Maduro regime, in effect, to come over to the opposition side. And they had a plan. Sadly, it didn't work, and Maduro remained in power. But the idea should be that the new government is the opposition. The people who won the presidential election in 2024 that Maduro stole. And yet, by dealing with Maduro's own regime, Trump really is strengthening them. He's giving them a kind of legitimacy that they just don't deserve. So I think the people of Venezuela are going to be cruelly disappointed if we continue down this path. It's just wrong to talk about regime change here. Maduro's been removed, but the regime is still there.
What does that tell you about Trump's motivations?
Well, I think his mind is just full of mush on this. I don't think he knows what his real motivation is. One day it's drugs, the next day it's terrorism, the next day it's illegal immigration into the U.S., the next day it's oil. But then he says it's not regime change. You know, the Secretary of State and Secretary of Defense briefed Congress a couple of weeks ago. Regime change was not the objective, and so you put all that together, and to me, it's further confirmation, more evidence that Trump is really just making this up as he goes along. This isn't part of some grand strategy. He's making decisions by the seat of his pants.
When he does mention oil, which he's done with a bit more frequency, for example, since everything that took place on Saturday, he talks more specifically about, right away, his priority is to get American companies more access to Venezuelan oil. I know you know Venezuela very well. Is it that simple?
Not at all. Look, it is true that the oil infrastructure in Venezuela, from exploration to drilling to production to refining, from top to bottom, is very dilapidated, very decrepit. The Chavez-Maduro regime has been stealing the oil profits for decades, has not reinvested in PDVSA, the state-owned oil company. So for anybody to try and revive production in Venezuela and make it ready for export is going to take billions and billions of dollars of capital investment. And it's going to take time to do it. You can't snap your fingers and have this all come into play all at once. Even if you could get major American companies and other foreign companies to take the risk of going back into Venezuela, how do they know in a few years their assets may not be expropriated yet again?
What's the takeaway out of that from Canada? Because I think, because we have heavy oil as well, obviously the U.S. remains our primary customer. There's definitely speculation today, and you saw evidence of it even materialize in the stock market with Canadian oil stocks, that this could have a negative impact on Canadian exports to the United States, for example, of heavy crude. Based on what you just said, it sounds like it's not cause for panic at this moment in time yet.
No, not at all. And I think Trump he's focused obsessively on the price of gasoline at the pump. He knows he promised to end inflation and the concern American consumers had about inflation. He hasn't really been able to do that. Prices of gasoline are down somewhat, but he keeps thinking about the price at the pump. Even if all of this investment that we've discussed took place, even if it proceeded at the most rapid pace possible, it would still be years before significant new Venezuelan production could come online. And so somebody may benefit and somebody may be harmed, but it'll be after Trump leaves the White House in all likelihood.
What do you make of his musings, his open musings since what happened early in the morning Saturday about replicating similar actions in other countries?
Well, I think it's evidence of what a very insightful person once said to me, that Trump has no filter between his brain and his mouth, and these things come out. I don't think it's serious. I don't think we should assume that plans are underway at the Pentagon to invade Colombia or Greenland or Canada. But I think when Trump talks that way, he does enormous harm to the United States because people don't know whether he's serious or not, and may make him feel more satisfied, but it's really quite harmful to the U.S. and our relations with countries around the world.
I wonder, just maybe on that note, a concluding question. In the vein of, for example, Denmark, it's very specific that he when he talked about it, when he brought it up, when he was scrumming with reporters, he invoked national security and you obviously are an expert in the area, but in his most recent national security strategy that was released, he referenced it as well. This idea that if it's in the hemisphere and it's a resource the United States needs for national security, they won't hesitate to go get it. What should Canada, and I take your point very much so about it's difficult to determine his rationale or how seriously we should take him, but what should Canada take from that, do you think?
Well, I don't think he's read his national security strategy. I don't think he really cares about it. He didn't in the first term. I don't see why he should now. But he is impulsive, transactional. He doesn't think in grand thoughts. And the risk that one day he may decide to do something is high. And he doesn't have people around him who are going to say, but, Mr. President, that could cause problems. I think any kind of move against Greenland or even more far-fetched against Canada would be the end of the NATO alliance. It would do incalculable damage, not just to the United States, but to the entire Western world. And, just got to keep a level set on this. We're now down to just a little bit over 3 years before his term is over. And we have to collectively think of ways to minimize the damage, to turn his attention to something else. Lest he cause real damage in NATO.
Okay, I will leave it on that note. I appreciate your time and your insights as always, Ambassador Bolton. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks for having me.
John Bolton is former national security advisor to Donald Trump in his first administration. We're going to take a quick commercial break, but on the other end of that break, we've got to take a look at what Trump is doing and saying and the potential implications for Canada, as well as the Canadian political domestic reaction. We've got our Monday regulars at the front bench standing by to do exactly that. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. There they are. They're back with us in just a few moments.
It's not going to frighten me. It shouldn't frighten anyone in Canada. What he should be focusing on getting a deal done. We're their number one customer. They're our number one customer. I'm not going to worry about President Trump. I'm going to worry about what we can do, how we can diversify our trade around the world.
Ontario Premier Doug Ford pivoting to trade issues when asked for his reaction to the events of the weekend in Venezuela and what they potentially mean for Canada, specifically if he was concerned about Trump wanting to annex this country in the future. Federally, Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand has not taken questions and was unavailable for tonight's program. Prime Minister Mark Carney did release a statement reading in part that Canada, quote, welcomes the opportunity for freedom, democracy, peace, and prosperity for the Venezuelan people, and, quote, calls on all parties to respect international law. We stand by the Venezuelan people's sovereign right to decide and build their own future in a peaceful and democratic society. Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre, meanwhile, writing in part congratulations to President Trump on successfully arresting narco-terrorist and socialist dictator Nicolas Maduro, who should live out his days in prison. The legitimate winner of the most recent Venezuelan elections, Edmundo Gonzalez, should take office along with the courageous hero and voice of the Venezuelan people, Maria Corina Machado. And interim NDP leader Don Davies said in part, the U.S. attack on Venezuela is neither an act of self-defense, nor does it have UN Security Council authorization. It is therefore totally illegal and a breach of the UN covenants the U.S. has agreed to uphold as a member state. There's a lot to unpack there with our front bench. With me tonight, former New Brunswick Liberal Premier Brian Gallant. He's the CEO of Space Canada. Former Conservative Deputy Leader Lisa Raitt is here. She's the Vice Chair and Managing Director of Global Investment Banking at CIBC. CTV News political analyst and former leader of the federal NDP, Tom Mulcair, is with us. And rounding us out this evening, the Toronto Star's Queen's Park Bureau Chief, Rob Benzie. Hi, everyone. Happy New Year.
Hey, Ashley.
Very good to see you. Although it doesn't necessarily feel happy, there's a lot of serious stuff going on. And I'll start on that note. I took great interest in the responses from my first two guests, Brian, David Petraeus and John Bolton, who seemed to downplay the prospect of more of this happening or, what it means more generally for resource-rich countries in the hemisphere and Trump's desire to have more U.S. access to them. Do you kind of share that view that there's not that much to be worried about or we shouldn't overhype it, or do you have a concern around that where Canada is concerned?
Yeah, I share that view. I mean, I'm not an expert. I think they made lots of good points. I mean, the circumstances are not very comparable other than the fact that we have obviously a lot of energy resources. So look, I think we should not overstate what this means for Canada. But at the same time, in the same breath, we should obviously still be aware that things like this are happening. And look, I don't want to be I don't sort of overstate this, but I think at the same time we have to consider the idea that when you see a world leader do something that is against the UN conventions, is an illegal act, well then if they don't get the type of repercussions, reactions that maybe it would warrant, maybe it does embolden them to do something else that might be a bit of a surprise for us all. And I don't think, again, to go to the sort of the premise of your question, I don't think we should be worried about it, but I think we should definitely be aware of it. And I think if we start to see this slippery slope continue, and that the reaction and sort of the repercussions of these types of acts stay the same, then certainly I think everyone around the world should start to get a bit nervous.
Let's talk a little bit, Lisa, about that reaction, in particular the statements that we read. I've seen them all criticized from different angles. I think this is unique, right? Because yes, that there are those contraventions that Brian referenced. At the same time, there is no taking away from the fact that Maduro is a terrible human who did terrible, terrible things for a sustained period of time to Venezuelans, just like Chavez did before him. So it's like this, it's nuanced in a way, but at the same time, you're seeing different reactions, in particular from Carney and Poilievre. What do you make of those reactions?
I really think how we feel about the actions of President Trump in this matter are irrelevant. And what we should be thinking of as leaders in the country is, well, what are we going to do now? And doing nothing is actually a decision. You just can't sit back and watch it all happen and not think that you're not going to be impacted. You are. World oil is going to be impacted. Canadian economy is going to be impacted. And with such a big power move that just happened in Venezuela, you have to think for yourself in terms of, okay, right, Canada, what are we going to do next? Putting out a statement is essential. I think both of them put out the statements that they wanted to put out from a political, partisan point of view. But I got to tell you, I care about Canada. And I want to make sure that whatever is happening to the south of us, we are insulated, protected, and not only that, we're able to put in place the steps that we need in order to ensure our own sovereignty and our own safety going forward. And that's kind of, it's not like I'm saying it's not really any of our concern. It totally is our concern, but what we should be concerned about is our reaction to it and what our plans are going to be going forward, not about the words we chose to describe it and whether or not it's on side with international law.
In that vein, I think the focus is definitely on what it means for the oil sector here, Tom, right? In particular, because Venezuela sits on reserves that, by the way, are not getting out of the industry has atrophied, but they sit on a massive amount of reserves that is the same kind of oil that we export to the United States. So,
yeah.
I had the benefit of interviewing a number of experts today on my radio program who all seem to conclude, again, no reason to panic because there's still so much instability there. The sector has atrophied. If companies do go back there, it's going to take a while to build things up. So don't panic. But then you see at the same time what happened to Canadian oil stocks, right? Which was essentially reflective of a panic to a certain degree, which tells me I'm not exactly sure how worried we should be. What do you think?
I think that the expertise that you had on your show is reflective of the reality of it, and people who are reacting in the market are reacting to a couple of stories that appeared over the weekend that were very dramatic, and this is going to be terrible for the Canadian oil patch. And I think that I'm not in the business of giving investment advice, but I think that people who are making investment decisions might want to look at the experts and not at the one or two people who penned out something over the weekend, just sort of going, wow, this must be just awful for Canada. And I think that Lisa's got it right. I mean, this is a long-term thing. It's a complicated market. The infrastructure, the one thing that Trump got right is that the infrastructure is awful. That's why they're not able to make any money. Trump insists that he's going to be taking a lot of money out of the ground. That's something to be worried about. And I think that the people of Venezuela have reacted to that sort of behavior with putting in people like Chavez and Maduro. By the way, I love the way we chose those three clips of the three party leaders, Vashi, because Carney, I think, did a masterful job of trying to straddle both the conservative reaction, yay, the guy's in the slammer, keep him there for life, he's a bad guy, and the NDP reaction, which is, no, this is completely against international law, come on, this can't happen. And Carney basically said both at the same time. On the one hand, it's, we've got to have international rules and respect them without saying that the Americans broke them, which of course they did. And then at the same time saying, but this guy is really a thug and he's denied democracy and he cheated in his last election and he's held his people down. And it's probably a good thing that he's gone. So I think that on a purely simple Canadian level, we got it right politically. And I think that overall, the oil patch is going to survive this one just nicely. Thank you. And it might actually push in favor of the type of deal that Carney was going for with Daniel Smith for a second pipeline to the Pacific.
Hope so.
Yeah, more elsewhere, less to the U.S. Benzie, your thoughts on what the takeaway for Canada is?
Yeah, I think Tom and Lisa are bang on, Vashi. This is one of these things. Everyone is very excited, and there are a lot of histrionical rhetoric over the weekend about this, and it is an unprecedented type of thing that's happened. But I don't think it is regime change. Don Bolton was correct to you earlier in the show, Vashi. It's the Chavezistas are still in power. I've only been to Venezuela once, and it was years before Hugo Chavez drove the country into the ground. And it's a lovely place, great people, and it really has been decimated over the last many decades. And Maduro was, it's a kleptocracy. It's a narco state. So there's not going to be a lot of tears shed for his departure. But his party's still in power, and his vice president is the interim president. And it doesn't sound like there's going to be the kind of regime change I think that a lot of people who when they initially heard about Maduro leaving, would have wanted. So Machado's not going to be the president. She's, a world hero, a Nobel Peace Prize winner. But we're going to be stuck, or they're going to be stuck with the same odious regime. And it's great for, I guess, American oil companies in the short term that they could get access to this these atrophied oil fields and everything like that. But I'm not sure it's going to be the change for the people of Venezuela and the hundreds of thousands of refugees who have fled to neighboring Colombia and other parts of South America and indeed into the United States. It's a great headline for Mr. Trump on one day, but I think he doesn't have people as smart as Dave Petraeus and John Bolton advising him now. And I think it's going to be a very tumultuous time in the days and weeks and months ahead.
I got to switch gears and ask you all about a domestic story that kind of evolved throughout the day. It started with this post. I just want to put it up. It's from Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, announcing that Chrystia Freeland, former deputy prime minister here in Canada, would now serve in an official capacity advising his government, as an economic advisor, I should say. It didn't take long for critics in the opposition, in particular in the Conservatives, to say, well, why is she doing that and remaining on as an MP and as the Prime Minister's special representative on the reconstruction of Ukraine? Just about an hour ago, somewhere in and around there, maybe a little bit more, Chrystia Freeland then posted on social media what you're seeing ahead of you, announcing that in accepting the voluntary position, she's stepping aside from that role as the special representative, and in the quote-unquote coming weeks, she will resign as MP. The Prime Minister just posted on social media saying, "You are uniquely qualified for this important new role. It is a further credit to Canada's steadfast support for Ukraine that a Canadian is taking on this role at this crucial, sorry, I'm just pulling it up right now, at this crucial moment for Ukraine's future." So I just want to bring everyone back and get your take on how this did evolve. I'm actually a bit surprised, Brian, that the announcement today wasn't, I'm resigning from all that stuff with the Canadian government. Even though this is unpaid, even though it's not full-time, it is serving in an official capacity to a foreign government.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you said that the opposition was pretty quick to send out their reaction to this. Yeah, obviously, it's kind of like a no-brainer, I would think. And it's a bit shocking, frankly, that we wouldn't have had the resignation of that special envoy position, whatever the official title was, and the confirmation of resignation as an MP. I mean, it's really sort of like day one of onboarding of being elected is that you probably should not do something like this, right? It's 101, first thing. You are to do everything that's good for Canada and not advise any other government. Look, an ally, don't get me wrong, at a time that they definitely need our support. So the cause is definitely something that is worthwhile, but just the way in which that this happened, I think, is incredibly unfortunate. I think Freeland will do a good job in that, but I think that should be something she's focused on as somebody that's not a member of Parliament. Look, the idea that she says, I'm going to be leaving in the next few weeks. My sense is that she thought it's kind of collective knowledge that she's on the way out, so nobody will mind. She's going to take on some roles, and had she been completely out of the role of MP and all the other stuff, I would certainly be saying this is great and best of luck, and it's important work. But I think the way in which we got here was very unfortunate.
Just have a few minutes. I want to get everybody in. Lisa, what do you think?
So I'm really concerned by it. She's got three different things at play. She's got a code of conduct as a member of parliament. She has obligations as a sitting parliamentary secretary. She also has obligations as a former cabinet minister. She's not out of her cooling off period whatsoever, and she's had significant dealings with Ukraine in the last year. These rules are in place in order to make sure that they're being applied to have a situation where we don't have former ministers or former or current MPs out trying to get jobs on the backs of the fact that they have this position of power within a government. We can say that Ukraine is different. We can say that Chrystia Freeland is different. It doesn't matter. The rules are the rules. What she should have done, quite frankly, is draft the resignation letter or have a nice letter from the ethics commissioner saying, I looked at it from all 360 and it's all good. No worries. She doesn't have either of those.
Yeah, source close to her is saying she did converse with the ethics commissioner, but to Lisa's point, there's nothing in writing or officially on the record to that effect. Tom, your thoughts?
I'm so uncomfortable. I could not believe when I read her text this afternoon. One of the Toronto papers had it, she's resigning as MP. And I said, okay, she got that right. And then you go into the word for word of what she put out, as you correctly said, Vashi, in the coming weeks. But that means that for the coming weeks, she is a member of the Canadian Parliament, our core democratic institution, and she has obeisance to a foreign power because she's giving them advice that's good for them. Now, I'm very much like Brian on this. I couldn't be more in favor of Ukraine in the illegal war being prosecuted by Russia against it. That's not what this is about. This is about Canada. This is about our parliament. It's about our House of Commons and its integrity. And I still can't believe that someone with the experience and expertise of Chrystia Freeland doesn't seem to quite get that. And I have a feeling there might have been a bit of a broken telephone that made it to Carney. Maybe he got the title, which was she's stepping down as MP. I'm not sure he should have put out that exact statement because he is essentially countenanced a member of parliament working, she says it's as a volunteer, changes nothing, working for a foreign power to put forward the interests of that foreign power. It's a huge mistake, and I can't believe that Chrystia Freeland, with all the brains that she's got, is ending her career this way. I'm gobsmacked. 30
seconds, and they all go to you, Benzie.
I'm surprised too, Vashi. She's full disclosure. Chrystia Freeland is my local MP. I don't vote in elections, but she is I live in Toronto, University of Rosedale, and she's a very popular MP. But frankly, you could run my Cavapoo Poppy with a red tie in that riding as a Liberal, and she would win. So I'm not saying that Poppy's a Liberal, but I don't know what she is. But I think though, as a constituent, I do find it very unusual, and Tom is bang on. The optics are really bad, even though most Canadians agree that helping Vladimir Zelensky is a very good thing to do. It's the way this is rolled out is not a good look.
I will leave it on that note. Thanks, everyone. Pleasure to see you again in the new year. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie, our front bench. We've got more Power Play coming up in just a moment. Welcome back to Power Play. Domestic news following Prime Minister Mark Carney to Europe this evening. The Prime Minister has now touched down in Paris for a coalition of the willing meeting on Ukraine. And while he was in the air, he lost an MP, with former Deputy Prime Minister Chrystia Freeland announcing she'll step down in the, quote, coming weeks after taking a role as Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky's economic advisor. How's the news hitting the Prime Minister's tour? The CTV News senior political correspondent Mike LeCouture has just landed in Paris alongside the Prime Minister. He's staying up late to talk to us. Mike, I appreciate it very much. If you could touch on, both how this news is landing, but then also the purpose of the trip, that would be great.
Yeah, first of all, Vashi, it seems like a number of people in Carney's entourage were not sure what was happening. In fact, the tweet that we saw from Volodymyr Zelensky early this morning announcing that Freeland would be this new advisor was a shock to them. And on the plane, there was a question as to whether or not we would have Freeland resigning her seat when we did land or not. So that's how it landed in the air. And certainly we saw the tweet from Prime Minister Mark Carney just a few moments ago, thanking Chrystia Freeland for her work and saying that Canada will continue to stand with Ukraine, but saying that she is uniquely qualified for this new important role. And of course, this new important role will not be happening here in Paris, but certainly the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, more than 30 world leaders gathered to try and work towards some sort of a just peace and a lasting peace in Ukraine. And we got a briefing from some Canadian officials on background coming over here. They believe that the leaders will be building on these meetings that a number of national security and defense advisors had with Zelensky in Kyiv over the weekend. They say that there is more of a path to peace now than there has been. They really want to seize on this opportunity. Asked what kind of a role that Canada could play and whether or not that means boots on the ground, one of the officials said they'll be in a better position, Canada will be, to provide that type of support next year and even more so the year after. We know that Canada already has a role to play in terms of the battle group, leading the battle group in Latvia, but certainly that will be part of the discussion, exactly what they can do to make sure that there are those security guarantees that Zelensky says are so important and are not in place just yet.
Okay. Mike, appreciate it very much. Our senior political correspondent, Mike Lecouture in Paris. We're back in just a moment with more Power Play. Welcome back to Power Play. Our takeaway today is all about our top story, what is unfolding in Venezuela and what it potentially could mean for Canada. In particular, Venezuela sits on a large amount of oil reserves. And the type of oil in Venezuela, heavy crude, is exactly what we have here in Canada. That has led to a lot of speculation since what unfolded on Saturday, especially since Donald Trump talks about going into Venezuela for U.S. companies rather to have more access to that oil, about what it means for our competitiveness or our oil industry more largely. We spoke to former national security advisor to Donald Trump about exactly that. He insists it's no reason for Canadians to panic yet.
Even if all of this investment that we've discussed took place, even if it proceeded at the most rapid pace possible, it would still be years before significant new Venezuelan production could come online. And so somebody may benefit and somebody may be harmed, but it'll be after Trump leaves the White House in all likelihood.
And that sentiment has been echoed by a number of experts in the Canadian oil space or the Canadian oil sector. I will say, though, and it's an important caveat, if you take a look at the markets today and where they closed, in particular on the TSX, energy stocks were down. They weren't as down as they were, let's say, 6 or 7 hours ago, but most of them did finish down. So there is an impact that is materializing on the markets right now. Whether that continues and persists throughout the rest of the week is perhaps a different question, but it is something to keep an eye on. I will leave Power Play there. Thanks so much for joining us. Happy to be with you in this new year. Wishing you all the best, and we'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place. Have a wonderful evening.